Hello and welcome to the video edition of the DX Mentor. I'm Bill AJB and welcome to my shack. Twice a month we will have episodes dealing with DX topics, and I am the DX Mentor. In my role, I will be getting many DX gurus to sit in and have a conversation with me that I know you'll find exciting, interesting, and you can learn. This very first one, The Thrill of DX, it has been attended by Scott, K0MD, Joe, WAGEX, and Ned, AA7A. They have a wealth of information, tons of experience, and they have a lot of enthusiasm that they want to share with you. So I can't wait to get your feedback. To do that, send me an email at ajb@arrl.net or thedxmentor@gmail.com. I'd love to have you subscribe to the channel and give me a thumbs up. So thanks a lot. I hope you enjoy this.
Thanks for having me on this podcast, Bill. This is a real pleasure. I'm Ned Stearns, AA7A. I've been a ham for almost 60 years, and I'm 50 years old. And I have to say that ham radio had a huge impact on my career. After years of being a ham, I went to Purdue and got an electrical engineering degree, and it just sparked everything in my life. It's just been the thing that has kept me going for all of these years. And after all those years on the air, I've amassed an endless list of operating accomplishments. I won't bore anybody with them, but the big ones were, doing the DXCC challenge, which is working every country on every band as much as you possibly can. And I got to the 3,000 level a couple of years ago, which is about as far as you can go. And you'd think I'd quit, but I haven't. I've also completed what's called the Fred Fish Memorial Award, which is a 6-meter activity. I completed that. That's all 488 grid squares in the continental US. I was elected into the CQ Magazine Hall of Fame in 2020, which is it's almost like running for homecoming king. It's a competition in itself, but after having been on 30 Expeditions and a couple of them just into the icy waters of the Antarctic, apparently it impressed enough people that happened. But I keep going at it. I keep finding things to do. I'm working on remote station design and construction, and I have now have 2 different moonbound systems on 2 different bands in 2 different locations, which I am building and operating. So for me, there's always something to do, and it just in ham radio, just NDXing keeps me going.
So if someone wanted to follow your exploits and your progress, where would they go?
Yeah, just contact me, and I will help them with whatever they need to know. Usually, the best bet is to find someone near you who is good at the game, and they will be more than happy to bring you in, let you operate their station. And for me, you could actually remote into my station. I'll help you do that. So there's lots and lots of ways to play, but I think the best approach is to find someone local who will help you.
Okay, great. And then we have Scott, right? K0MD from the frozen tundra. Scott?
Hey, good. Hello, Bill and Ned and Joe. It's a real privilege to be a part of this great group. I mean, both Ned and Joe have been individuals that I've looked up to for many years and learned a lot about DXing and ham radio. They're both giants in the field and extremely accomplished hobbyists as well as individuals. So I feel a bit awkward being on the podcast with these 2 giants, so to speak, Bill. I got started in ham radio in 1977, so I've been licensed about 45 years. And I started DXing from the first day. I didn't know there was any other aspect to ham radio except to try to work people overseas or far away. And it's always been a real interest of mine. In fact, I started working as a middle school student when I was 12 and 13 to earn money so I could buy a tower and get a tri-band Yagi up. And then the world opened up. And then a couple of years after I got that up, I had bought a Drake B line, and a local ham who was quite an accomplished DXer came by my station. And just as Ned had suggested earlier, he showed me how to work split and how to do CW DXing and how to call. And that really improved my DXing. I didn't really start keeping count of DX totals until I started computer logging in the 2000s. And I've only been computer logging since 2006, but I have about 323 countries confirmed and only 1,650 or so in the DXCC challenge. I'm not quite as accomplished as Joe or Bill. And I'm sorry, Joe or Ned. And Joe persuaded me to take a 30-meter antenna to Turks and Caicos. I'm sorry, 60-meter antenna to the Turks and Caicos a few years ago when I was down there for a contest. And so I did some 60-meter DXing, and Joe will talk about that a lot. So anyway, I've been a ham. I do mostly HF operating. In fact, the only 2-meter equipment I own are HTs that sit in a charger and never get turned on. So my entire station is really dedicated to HF, and I make not infrequent trips to Phoenix for work, and I try to have dinner with Ned every time I'm out so I can learn something new from him. And his station's an engineering marvel. I have to brag about his station. It's really well designed, well thought through. He has inspired me to improve my station. And Joe is no slouch on a good station too. Joe's one of those places you have to visit his station if you're at the Dayton Hamvention. You want to see W8GEX's marvel too. So Bill, that's about all I have to say right now, but I'll be glad to talk more as we continue.
Great. My only comment would be, I guess I take exception to the giants in the field. I am 6'9", so I kind of feel like I'm in there with these guys also, but that's to be determined.
Well, we would mention that you are the only University of Dayton alumnus in the group today.
There you go. Yeah, that has something to do with it. So, all right, Joe, W8GEX in Oxford, Ohio. Tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you. And first of all, thanks for putting this on, Bill. And Bill is a giant. I'm 5'7", and I look straight up at him. So he's a big boy. I got started as a SWO in 1955 and did that for several years. Just fell in love when I heard DX. Then I got my technician class, was on 6.2, 432 for several years. And then we had some good openings into the Caribbean. And then once I worked at DX, I was absolutely hooked. I just thought that this is the best thing next to sliced bread for me. So I work all bands. I got 25 acres here in Southwest Ohio. Excuse me. And pretty much got plenty of room to put antennas. The 25 acres is all flat, and we're really got it stretched out. And Bill and Scott have both been here. Been on 61 D expeditions. Some of them were just myself on family vacation, and others were 20-man major D expeditions. And I just absolutely fell in love. Every time I do one, I'm anxious to start another one. It's just something about it that gets in your blood. And then 2003, as Scott mentioned, 60 meters become available to us. And I picked that up. I was the first one to take it on a D expedition to Montserrat. And me and the boys had fun working 60 meters down there and been really, really hooked on 60 meters. I really, really enjoy that band, but I'm on the radio being retired. I'm pretty much on the radio every day, particularly on the gray lines. I'm into the gray line. So I get up early in the morning and then in the evening I work the gray line. And then by 7 o'clock, I'm ready to go to bed. So that's pretty much my life and lifestyle, Bill.
Okay. Well, one of the goals of this DX Mentor podcast is more of a roundtable, just to throw out questions and or topics or ideas. So I guess one of the things that I've been asked before, and I write a column for the Ohio Section Journal every week, and I'll get a question sometimes like, what is DX and what is really different than sometimes when I just hear people making contacts out west or just anywhere in the country? What really makes it different? And although it's like you can start explaining that, I've never able to get the kind of the passion behind it. So Scott, can you maybe find a way to encapsulate that? Someone's in an elevator and just said to you, oh, so you like to talk to people all over the world. What's the fun in that?
You know, they often say that. Well, why do you use ham radio when you could call them on a cell phone or use Skype? And I said, well, why do you buy fish at Hy-Vee if you can go fishing, right? Or
Yeah.
vice versa. I mean, there's a thrill about working people. I mean, it's pretty mundane to pick up the call, or as I had this morning, a Zoom meeting with a group in the Middle East, but you never know, and it's not predictable, and it's not for certain when you get on the radio, whether it's a digital mode, CW, Morse code, or sideband, and just try to work someone. I think traditionally we think of DX as working outside of the continental US. I remember for me early on, Hawaii was a good DX location because I could not consistently work them. But now I have a really good antenna set up, and people will say, well, where's the farthest place you've talked in the world? And I'll say, name any country in the world, name any country. And they'll name something, and they'll say Australia. Yep, many times. Talk to them any day of the week. Well, how about China? Yep, talk to them frequently at sunrise or sunset, especially on the weekends. So, DX is really working people a long distance away and generally outside of your own country. And for us in the U.S., it's usually meaning crossing an ocean to get somewhere.
Ned, what would you say?
Well, I like to say that DX is when you work something that's unexpected. Radio originally was primarily a kind of into broadcasting or reliable communication, like radio dispatching of police or taxis or whatever. You want the radios to work all the time and have certain coverage, and the radio systems are designed to provide that service. But every once in a while, something comes in out of the ordinary. It's just not expected. And that's what attracted me. Like Joe, I started out as a VHF guy, and I got on with some modest equipment and just talked to guys around town or kids my age, had similar setups, and we would just get on and talk to each other every night. And then every once in a while, someone would come in from out of town, out of state, and it'd just be different. And you go, well, what was that? What caused that? Why does that happen only every once in a while? And as we now know, we call 6 meters the magic band. It's either noise or your neighbor, and then all of a sudden something unexpected. So for me, it depends on what part of the spectrum you're operating. If it's blue light or 137 kilohertz, those of us that are afflicted with this desire to work DX are waiting for and trying to optimize our operating activity or our station to get more and more of those unexpected events to happen.
Joe, what would you say?
Yeah, I agree with Scott and Ned. It's just a passion with me to work DX. Anybody that's foreign countries, I'm just obsessed in working these guys and girls, and particularly at the gray line, and that's early in the morning at sunrise and sunset in the evening, and you see you have an enhancement in your signals, and all of a sudden people out of the blue just pop up, and so many times they are very, very needed countries that we're all looking for. I've been fortunate enough now to work them all. And I agree with Scott's comment that people say, how far have you worked? Well, you name it, and we seem to have been there and worked it. So yeah, I'm just a DX man all the way.
So one of the things I'll sometimes tell via email is that when you start working DX, and it's more than just I got it, I logged it, I'm done. When you actually take a sincere interest in working these folks, you actually start developing friendships. Which now I've not traveled outside the U.S. Other than a cruise, but even in writing our newsletter, I kind of have email pen pals now where guys will send me something and said, hey, is there anybody in your club that has had trouble with this amplifier because I can't quite get it right? And when you hear somebody on the air and you work them really quick, and then they know your name and hope you're doing well and how's Karen and stuff, it really adds to that. That's to me is kind of a differentiator. So Joe, I know there's been people that you have now met and had lifelong relationships with outside of this group or with the States, even like, and I'm going to say the name wrong, but Francesca in Rome. Is there one or two QSOs or meetings that come to mind that you've made a really solid friendship that started with amateur radio?
Yeah, Francisco, he's in charge of the Vatican amateur radio station. He's been here to the house, to our DX dinner. Just a great fella. I've been on some of my DX expeditions particularly the bigger ones, we've had an international crew. And because of that relationship on those D expeditions, I write those guys some weekly. Had one yesterday from a buddy in Sweden. So it's just interesting how we meet these guys on a D expedition, and then they're just like family from now on. So it's really rewarding in that respect.
Hey, Ned, have you had similar experiences?
Oh, I like Joe, I've been on a number of D expeditions, and I gotta admit that most D expedition teams are some of the most amazing collection of, let me just say, characters that you can ever find. And they're interesting relationships, especially when you get on a boat and you sail across the roaring 40s for a week. You get to know yourself and your friends very, very well. I have some great relationships and some interesting relationships with a lot of the hams that I've been on ventures. But let me point out one little story here. I had my very first big expedition was to Rodrigues Island in 1999. It had been off the air, it had been silent for, I don't know, about 15 years. Nobody had really been active there. And we put on the expedition, and we did pretty well. But there was a local ham, 3B9 Fox Radio, Robert, lived there and had been off the air for a couple of years. And we kind of sent him an email letting him know, or actually made a phone call to him, let him know we were coming. And he knew of us coming. And while we were setting up the station to get ready, he showed up at our front door and helped us build the station. And he sat down and operated the radio, and tears came to his eyes because he had been so long since he'd been on the air and to work CW. It just touched him that he could get back on the air. So we left a lot of our equipment there with him, got him back on the air, and he's been on the air ever since. And just, let me just, 30 years later, I get an email from him again, and he says, "Hey, I want to get back on 160. Can you help me get a new antenna?" And currently I'm on the board of directors for the Northern Cal DX Foundation, and I made a proposal that we fund him for a 160 antenna, and they all agreed, and it's now being shipped to him. And so he'll be on 160 in a big way. So we've had a 30-year relationship, strongest of bonds. I mean, we pick it up every couple of years. We'll exchange emails just to keep in touch. But some of these relationships you make on NDXing last a lifetime.
Joe said he would give more money to NCDXF if you guys will send a 60-meter antenna. So
yeah, well, we're working on the 6s. He's on 6 now. At 160, we'll get to 60.
All right, you may think about it. Scott, I know you're a world traveler, and I remember a particular story about you where you operated the first hours of a contest from Minnesota and the remaining hours in Chile, or vice versa. But what about a couple of your collisions, so to speak, with other hams?
Yeah, thank you. Bill, the most memorable DX contact I've ever had was when I was a teenager, and I was talking to a guy who told me his name was Tom in the Pitcairn Islands. And it turned out he was Tom Christensen. And I would remember sitting in my bedroom at home in southeastern Kentucky, in the Appalachian Mountains where I grew up, with this little tri-bander that I'd spent $100 and $100 for the tower and got it up. And here I was working the Pitcairn Island and didn't have headphones on. I was letting it run through the speaker. And my dad walks in from the house, and he's so enamored, he starts listening. And he said, "Would you ask him if his last name is Christian?" And I said, "Sure." And I said, "Are you Tom Christian?" "Oh, yeah." He said, I'm the descendant of Fletcher, from Mutiny on the Bounty." And I said, "Okay, yeah, thank you." So anyway, we had a wonderful conversation. My dad told me later the story about that. And that was quite memorable. And then I corresponded with his widow trying to get a QSL card. And then a bunch of my friends from here went to that island a couple of years ago. They invited me, but I couldn't leave work that length of time to go. I think, yes, Chile has been a wonderful trip. I've been to Chile 40 times for work, at least. And I've made friends with a number of ham radio operators there. CE3CT and CE2 Sugar Victor are two of the closest. But one time I took a station down to Chile and had it at a friend's house. He lived right on the ocean. And then I operated one night. And then the next morning I got up and the bands were dead. And I thought, oh, they're like home. The bands get dead here. Then I found that my coax had been chewed through by his dog, right? because the antenna was outside, and the coax had routed upstairs to the room where I was in, and his dog had chewed through it. So I needed a PL 259 to fix it, and I had the 59, but I know I didn't have it. I didn't have a soldering thing, and I was like, how did I come without this? But I talked to a ham named Aldo a couple of weeks before in Viña del Mar, Chile, and he said, if you need anything while you're here, just give me a call. Gave me a cell phone, so I called him. And he'd been up really late the night before, but he said, yes, come to my house at 10 a.m. and we'll take care of it. So my friend, a physician, and I went over to this guy's house, and my friend watched me solder a TL 259, and he's like, oh, you should have been a surgeon instead of a cardiologist. You're pretty good with your hands. I said, I've been doing this for 40 years. Don't judge me by it. And anyway, he was amazed that even though Aldo and I had never met in person, he opened his home and brought me in and gave me parts, and then before we left, he gave me a bottle of wine to take back so I could have something from Chile to enjoy. But it turns out Aldo had a brand new radio that he couldn't figure out how to send CW on. It was one of those, it was similar to it's a Kenwood 990. And so I showed him how to push the full break-in button so that it would transmit CW, and he had not quite figured that out. So he was so grateful for that, and I was so grateful for the use of the soldering equipment that, yeah. But I think another one that, Bill, that I want to share is I never met this person, but we had a person in Rochester who would show up frequently on the repeater named JY1, King Hussein from Jordan. And it turned out he ended up being hospitalized here in 1998. And it was all in the media and everything. So one of my coworkers at work was one of his physicians. And so I brought in some CQ and QST magazines and said, would you take this to His Majesty? He said, what is it? I said, oh, he'll know exactly what it is. I said, here's a QSL card, one of my cards. And I said, let him know if he wants a station set up in the hospital, I'll bring a radio in and we'll put an antenna up. And he takes it to him. And then 2 days later, he looks me up and he says, well, His Majesty wants to come to your home to see your station. And unfortunately, the king never got well enough to come to my home to see the station. But he has visited friends of mine. And CE2SV, Dale VE7SV, talks about the time that the king came to his home to see a new Collins lineup. And I think that would have been pretty cool if I could have actually hosted King Hussein, to have him operate at my station. But anyway, you just meet some really neat people. I think I spend my time when I'm traveling overseas looking for Yagi antennas. I don't know if Ned and Joe do this, but I do that. I look to see if there are hams around, and I'm not shy about knocking on doors and introducing myself to them. And I think one way, if the listeners are wondering if there may be a DXer or a potential DXer, if you find yourself looking at license plates on cars in front of you, and it says YBY727, you think, well, that would be Indonesia if it were a ham license, you're a DXer when you start converting license plates to call signs to DX entities.
That's a really good point. So one of the things that certainly your discussion about the king was something I wanted to touch on. But Joe, you had an interesting. What always strikes me, the deeper and deeper I get into this, is how much there is a humanitarian side to DXing that never really gets published. I mean, we hear about guys go to a country, they set up, they operate, and they get out, and hopefully they left it better than that. But I know there's a lot that goes on. There's a lot of villages that are touched. There are a lot of things that go on, and the one struck me a lot because my dad had a personal interest, and that was your trip, Joe, to Midway. And I believe there was a commemoration while you were there, if I can say that correctly. Can you touch on that for a minute?
Yeah, that was on Wake Island.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Yes, K9W. We had a hard time. I was just part of the crew, but our leader had a hard time getting permission to enter the island. Took us 2 years to actually pull that off. So the reason for going, the leader's reason for going, is that there was I think 79 civilian contractors that were murdered by the Japanese on the island. So the team, our whole purpose in going was to commemorate that anniversary when those men were killed. So Lou, our leader, had a list of all up. And we had a station in Boise, Idaho, because that's where the majority of them were from. So we had an amateur at Boise that got the family that he could get a hold of, come to his house and listen to Lou announce on 20 meters all those names of those civilians that were killed. And I was in station, I was working 20 meters at the time, and we had this all set up for like 1 o'clock. So I gave up the radio, obviously, so Lou could do it. John Miller, K6 Mike was in there with us, and it was very, very sad. Lou broke down during mentioning of the names, and chills just went down my spine. I had to leave the room to keep from crying myself. And I thought that was so touching. The whole trip was around these civilians that got murdered, and that was our reason for being there. And I guess of all the trips I have been on, that really sticks with me today.
Wow, that's probably because why I remember you don't think of that side of it, you know. So good for you, Ned. I have been encouraged by a famous DXer to ask you about Vince, and unless I'm wrong, I think that fits into this discussion, perhaps. So, and I should also point out that you were a member or are a member of the Voodoo DX group, which is known for dominating the expeditions to Africa, et cetera. So unfortunately I left that out at the beginning, and I'm sorry for that.
No problem. Yeah, Vince Thompson, K5VT is I mentioned before characters. Well, he is character number one on my list. He is one of the most engaging people I've ever met in my life. He's from Arkansas. He, like the rest of us, he got afflicted with a hobby, and I think it was in junior high. And there were a number of other similarly afflicted friends who formed this bond and were friends for their whole life and into ham radio. I don't remember all their calls, but everywhere I go, I bump into one of them. He went to University of Oklahoma as a all-star tight end under the Wilkinson era. I mean, he was a big time, big name player, and he blew out his knee in the first game, I think it was, of his freshman year or sophomore year then, and had to retire from football, and then decided to go into pre-med and became a doctor, oncologist, and practiced here in Phoenix for, I don't know, 25, 30 years or so. And I got to meet him while he was still working with the World Health Organization. He was trained to go into foreign countries and do follow-ups on training of doctors who had been trained at hospitals here in the States. And that gave him a chance to play his hobby while there. I mean, he would perform 20, 30, 40 surgical procedures during the day and get to his room and work the radio all night. And he did that time after time. I remember, working him in some of the strangest places in the world, and his CW skills are just one of the best ever. And it just his strength was just unbelievable. He just had a knack, and he was friends with everybody. If you ever met him, you just wanted to get his attention, and he would focus his deep blue eyes at you and talk with his melodious, Arkansas accent, and it just captured you. He's just one of those people that is so engaging, but there's so many stories about him that just are just, it's hard to pick one or two. But I did travel to Africa with him a number of times, and like before, he would be doing his shifts in the Voodoo contest group, and he'd go back to his room and get on his cell phone and start calling his patients and doing follow-ups with his patients when he's in his off time. He marched double time in this life, and he's just one of those people that I'll just never forget. There are a lot of stories I really can't talk about here, but sometime if you catch me somewhere and stop and buy me a beer, I'll tell you a couple of the really good Vince Thompson stories. But he's just one of those people I'll just never forget my whole life.
Okay, great. Let me switch gears a little bit, because I got an interesting email last week from someone who looked at this column thing that I do, and they said, man, I can't believe the DX that's coming through all the time now. Is this as good as it gets? And I kind of took a minute and I went back through some old log books. I've been doing this for about 3 solar cycles. I've been a ham since 71, but only chasing DX for like the last 30 or so years. And I'll date myself a little bit. I'm sure y'all remember chasing Russian oblasts in the old days, and we'd be on 20 meters, it'd be open around the clock. And so I think if I were to become a DXer, now is a really good time to do that, because as good as it is right now, it's going to get a lot better over the next several years. So I'll start maybe with Joe this time. Overall, Joe, what do you see is going to be a lot of fun over the next couple of years?
Well, I'm excited about the Beauvais guys. I've got them on 3 bands, but I'll certainly, try to work them on other bands. Like I think all 4 of us have been through these cycles where propagation is just beautiful. And then over the 11-year cycle, it falls down, and you're sort of lucky to talk to your neighbor in some cases. But I'm looking forward to the next, 4 or 5 years, I guess. I think it's going to be outstanding. And it's good right now, if you ask me. It is very good. I worked New Zealand on 6 meters last week. So I was at the height of my glory doing that now. And I had already worked New Zealand, but it's just a thrill of working them again. So yeah, I think the propagation is outstanding and going to get better.
Okay, Scott, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Joe. I think these are certainly the best of times, and as the book says, sometimes the worst of times. One of the lessons I've learned out of the last several solar cycles is take advantage when it's hot. We have a saying here in the Midwest that says, make hay while the sun shines. And you really have to be on the air and on the bands when the solar cycle's at its peak to get those countries. And if you let work get in the way or other things get in the way, you're going to miss it, and it's going to be a long wait till it comes back. I would also say that we're in the best of times ever right now, not because of the peak of the solar flux. It's not going to be as high probably as it was in the 50s or 60s. But we're in the best of times because of several things. One, antennas have never been better than they are now. 2, radios are the best we've ever seen. The receivers are more sensitive and selective and have better filtering, and digital processing helps with noise, and the SDR boom has really helped. And then 3rd, technical people like Ned have brought in new modes like FT8 and others that just allow you with almost a short piece of wire and 100 watts to be able to work the world. Maybe Ned wants to comment, but he was in the Pacific a couple of years ago, and I think he was running 3 or 4 radios at one time with FT8 on 3 or 4 bands just to be able to work people. So I think if you're willing to try new modes and really just tune your station up a little bit, you're going to see opportunities like we've never seen. And like Joe, I can't wait to work the Beauvais team in January, and hopefully Crozet later this year. And I'm still hoping North Korea will get opened up. I need North Korea. And the last one that I really want is Scarborough Reef. I don't know if the Chinese will ever be able to get back there, but I hope they do, because I'm convinced I worked them the last time, but I didn't make the log. And so I have an amplifier now, so I'm ready to really work them with high power.
Okay, Ned, any comments?
Yeah, well, let me follow up on what Scott mentioned. We start with one of my big DXpeditions was to South Sandwich Island, which is if it's not the edge of the world, you can see it from there. And I was one of my roles was to be the CW team lead to make sure that I had the right operators and the right schedule and assigned, and I'd done such a good job that I didn't have a slot for myself. So I sat down at the RTTY position because it was empty, and I managed to pull off 10,000 RTTY QSOs or something like that from South Sandwich, and it was a horrible assignment. RTTY is ugly. It's terrible. It's a very inefficient modulation scheme. Signals are terrible. It's just hard to pick out a single signal in a pile. It's nasty. And when I got back, I was interviewed by W0YK Ed Munza, who's the NCJ digital contesting author, and he interviewed me, and I kind of blasphemed RTTY, and I said it needs to be replaced with something. I didn't know what. And then a couple of years later, I had a chance I was asked by Joe Taylor, Dr. Joe Taylor, the author of WSJT and FT8 modes, all the modes, all those modes. And he asked me if I would help him with a version of FT8 that would work for contesting. I mean, FT8 hit the streets in 2017 or I don't know, something in that era, and it just exploded. It became the mode. It just attracted lots and lots of people, and but it was not ready for contesting really or for DXing. And so he asked me if I could help work out a way to make it more adaptable to DXing. And so I enlisted several of the other members of the upcoming team to Baker Island to work on a new protocol, a new way to manage the context in the mode to be enhanced for DXpeditions to get the rates up a bit higher. And so over the course of about 9 months, the team worked on, I mean, I wrote the requirements document. I actually came up with the title Foxhound for this mode in my requirements paper, and it kind of caught. And we worked with the development team, and we came up with this new protocol called Foxhound that changed, I think, DXpeditioning. And like Scott said, we went to the island with the idea of running this mode, and it was so easy that it turned out that a single operator could operate 3 stations at the same time and maintain rates that equaled what the other 11 people on the team were doing, and then all the other 10s on sideband and CW. It just revolutionized the mode. I mean, the wear and tear on the DX operator is dramatically reduced. There are no busted calls. It just made a huge impact, and it's going to be a big factor going forward. Like Bouvet coming up, they'll have a number of stations on FT8, so it's going to just make the opportunity to make a contact just that much better. So I think that's what's going to be different going forward. It's just, bands that were just marginally open will be quite usable using these new digital modes. So it's just going to be different this solar cycle peak than ever before, and it'll be exciting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it really is funny right now because you can tune 40 meters at night and not hear a thing on the CW portion, but you go up to FT8 and there's stuff everywhere. So it's really interesting. And yet what I always fear is, and I fall into this, there's too many people tuning. It's like your fishing analogy. If I don't cast, there's really no chance I'm going to catch anything. So that I get lazy, I guess, from that standpoint. So switching gears again, kind of just to cover another thing. One of the perceptions I think that I hear is that, well, I'd like to get into that, but I don't have 20 acres and I don't have $10,000 and I don't have this and that. And I always kind of push back and say, if you want to chase DX, you really don't need that. And let's keep our perspective. You got $1,000 cell phone in your pocket. So there's ways we can do this. And I like going to like R&L Electronics in Hamilton and just see what their used equipment is, because you can outfit a station for a couple of $100, enough to get you on the air to do certain things. So later in this podcast, and it's going to be a few months, I guess, but what I'm going to try to do is break DXing into tiers, like the first 100, right? So that first 100 is fairly easy. Then there's the middle 100, but then that top 100, that's where, it takes some skill. And yeah, you probably have to upgrade certain things. But assuming, and hopefully we've got some folks listening that maybe are hams, but they're not really chase DXers. So what would be your coaching as to how they could get in and get that first 100 to really get things going? Joe, I think you can start this time.
Well, I would say ask some of your friends if they got a radio that they're not using. Maybe they got one that they would sell reasonable, and then from there you can build a dipole, or I like inverted V's. Verticals are easy to set up and for the most part reasonable, but for sure a dipole or an inverted V, you just need 50 feet of wire, 100 feet of wire, an insulator, and enough cable to get into the house. So that's a good way. I try to Elmer some guys around my town, and that's the approach I take. Let's get a good used radio, but no sense starting off with a $7,000 radio when you can do pretty much the same thing with a cheaper radio. But I also believe that a new person needs to have a fairly decent radio, if at all possible, just so that he or she gets started off on the right foot. Because if you have an old car and every time you turn around you got a flat tire, you sort of get aggravated with it. But I think if you could come up with a decent radio, and there are some clubs that even have inventories of radio equipment that they'll either maybe give you or at least loan it to you till you sort of get on your feet. So I think those are approaches that I take here, Bill.
Ned?
Yeah, like Joe was saying, an unfortunate aspect of ham radio right now is a lot of hams are aging, and there are a lot of estate situations, and radios are easily available. You really don't need as much as you'd like a brand new ICOM. Sometimes you can find a vintage ICOM and get yourself on the radio with a modest investment, and that's, you know, I really think you'll get much more satisfaction if you get more out of a modest investment than you know, pulling out your Visa card and going first class. It's just, there's a lot to learn, and you got to, you know, start with something modest and then decide what works for you and what you want to do next. Antennas are not, if you don't have restrictions, antennas are not hard to put up. If you have restrictions, or again, talk to your local friends. They will help you figure out how to hide them under your eaves of your house or in your attic or something like that. You can get through. There's lots of people who do quite well with invisible antennas, so that shouldn't be a restriction. As much as you like to go fight City Hall, it may detract from the joy of the experience. So I suggest you try modest. The other thing is you can, you know, share their station. Either go over and help and operate at their station, a local friend station, or remote into it if you can sort that all out. So it should not be hard to get started. That first 100 should be easy to do. I know Scott probably does that in an hour in a contest.
So Scott, you're responsible.
Well, yeah, you know, Ned certainly, and KY7M and Mike and those who are part of the big remote station at NA7TB can do that in an hour. Might take me 2 or 3 here in the Midwest. Let me just say this: a couple of thoughts, and may not be as logical as what you've just heard. Number one, if you really want to work DXCC, get on a contest weekend like the ARRL DX contest or CQ Worldwide. I especially like the ARRL DX CW or sideband contest, because all the foreign stations have to work US. So you're going to be the desired station. And so they're going to hear your really weak signal, or they're going to hear your slow Morse code or whatever. And if you're intimidated by voice or Morse code, then there's an FT8 or a RIDI event that are available. You can use CQ Worldwide RIDI, WPX RIDI, WPX sideband. Those are all the great contests where you can get DXCC in a weekend. And what I'd set as a goal for my station, because I'm a serious contester, and Ned is as well, and I set a goal of 3 to 5 band DXCC per contest weekend, depending on the part of the solar cycle. And if I can't achieve that, I feel like I've not achieved my goals. So it's very doable. It's much easier than it sounds. In terms of getting on the air, we're recording this podcast in December, right after the ARRL 10-meter contest. A local ham had gotten on at my encouraging, and he had 2 antennas. He had a home-built 2-element Moxon Yagi, and he had a 10-meter dipole. And he put the 10-meter dipole at 30 feet and the Moxon at 20. And he said on the reflector today, boy, the dipole outperformed the Moxon. Why is that? And so some other people said, well, looking at modeling of it, you know, your Moxon didn't perform that well because it was too low, but your dipole was right at 1 wavelength up, and it performed normally, and it's going to be a good DX antenna. So what I recommend is if you have any trees in your yard and you can get an antenna up 50 feet or higher for any band 40 meters and lower, any band lower than that, you can you'll get a good signal in your work DX. So I recommend starting with a dipole or an inverted V. And the other thing I would recommend, if you can't, is to get a vertical. But I prefer horizontal antennas to verticals generally on any band 20 meters and up, because I think they perform better. With regard to equipment, I think it's been well covered. You don't need the latest $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 radio. Any of the manufacturers will sell you their top of the line radio, but you know, I achieved DXCC with an older used radio that I bought. And I think if you're thinking about what can I get on today, if you want a new radio, don't spend a fortune. Start with a Yaesu FT891 or an ICOM 7300. Don't go QRP. Start with 100 watts. Life is too short for QRP when you're a beginner. QRP is something an experienced person should do. Or get a used radio, like a Yaesu, an ICOM 756 Pro or a 7600. Those are fantastic radios and they're a fraction of their new cost. A Yaesu FT1000D or MP is a wonderful DX radio. You can get them for $700-800. But if you want to spend less, the Yaesu FT891 is like $600 or $700, and that's a bargain. The 7300 is around $1,000. Or I would say get a Kenwood, but they don't seem to be having much for sale right now. But the 590 is a good radio, but we're not sure about the supply chain. So you don't really need a new radio. If you're going to seriously invest, let's say $1,000 or $2,000, and you have the space, put half the budget into an antenna if you can. A few dipoles, maybe a small Yagi if you can get a tower and a Yagi, but you don't need that. The first 100 countries can be a weekend in a contest with a dipole that you aim broadside to Europe, which means if you're in North America, you orient one leg of the dipole southeast and one leg northwest, so that broadside it's northeast and southwest radiating, and you'll work those easy Pacific Rim countries like Australia, New Zealand, and most of Europe and Africa, and you'll have so much fun, you'll be addicted to DXing and contesting.
Okay, excellent answers, guys. Kind of the last topic I wanted to take a look at again for a newbie, because there's a couple guys where I work and they kind of have a passing interest, but they kind of, this surprised me, but they kind of didn't realize that computers were so closely tied to ham radio. I think they still had it in their mind that I get down here in the morning and, I hold this big microphone and just call CQ and hope somebody comes back. But, with the logging software and all the resources online now and the DX bulletins we can get in the DX, it's really pretty amazing. And once you're into it, I think it's very gratifying that you can, for instance, you can create an antenna by going through modeling software, and you can build the antenna and then you can actually use it and then compare that to what your modeling results are. The other thing Ned mentioned, and we're not going to go there, but there's a lot of issues surrounding FT8, right? Some like it, some don't. But I think what sometimes get lost is the team that put that together, and the guy, these are top people in the world that have spent their time developing this that we're allowed to take advantage of, Nobel Prize winners, et cetera. So I think sometimes we forget that. And I wonder if we don't need to do a better job of promoting some of the cool things that we've done, because we just don't get it out enough. And what I really appreciate about this group, and I've been kind of keeping track in my mind, we haven't really used any terms or made references to something that would have a deeper explanation. I think if someone's into ham radio, they can kind of follow this discussion, which kind of leads me maybe to our final question. And I'm trying to balance it out, but I guess I'll start with Scott again. What in just DX in general, what do you think in the general ham population, what might be the largest misconception about either chasing DX or being DX?
Yeah, and let me just say, it's a real privilege to see Dr. Joe Taylor, a Nobel laureate in physics, doing stuff in ham radio. I met him at Dayton and I was flabbergasted. I'm an academic physician, and to meet someone who's a Nobel laureate, it's really impressive. And we also have on this podcast Ned Stearns, who would likely be a Nobel laureate if his field had such an award for all he's done with engineering. And I'm not going to disclose that because some of it's not publicly disclosable, but Ned's a really accomplished technical person too. With regard to DXing, Bill, I want to make one comment about computers, because you're so right. Many of us who were licensed before 1995 have a resistance to putting computers with ham radio, and that's a big mistake. Get a radio that allows you to do a USB connection to your computer. If you're getting into the hobby, or if you want to upgrade your radio and you don't have one that allows you to have a direct USB connection to the PC, please do that, because it'll make all of the modes much simpler and all the computer control and integration much simpler. And don't resist it. You don't need to buy $500 conversion boxes to connect your radio, when most of them today, since about 2000, are USB ready. I think ICOM had that logo, and it makes a lot of sense. Biggest misconceptions: number one, it takes a lot of money to be a DXer, and that's nonsense. Thanks to Ned and his friendship with the 3B7 station, that's how I got confirmed. Ned, you're getting him on the air. That's my first contact in that state, that country, and that was new for me. Secondly, you don't have to be a really skilled operator. You can work DX as a novice, as a beginner, as a VHF only ham, and your first foray onto HF. Just get on and give them a call. They're nice to you. Most of the DX operators are not sophisticated hams. And they will work you, and they'll be delighted to talk to you. Third, it's not expensive. You can take a used radio that you buy for $300 at a ham fest and $50 of wire or a dipole, or buy a pre-built dipole from MFJ or Alpha Delta and put it up if you don't want to build. And I think the other thing you want to do is just avoid the rookie mistakes or the forced errors that they talk about in sports. Number one, don't buy cheap coax. Get good coax, because you don't want to lose your signal going to the antenna. Two, make sure the antenna is resonant. Make sure it's tuned. And if you don't know how to tune it, get a friend who's a ham in the community to come by and help you. Many of us have antenna analyzers, and we'll gladly show you how to tune your antenna, but make sure it's resonant so you don't lose power. And three, know when to operate, right? The DX is on the air a lot, but there are times when it's really good to work them. As Joe talks about gray line, that basically means sunrise and sunset. And so the signals, the propagation's enhanced when you have that night-day interface. And so you can work various places in the world. I often take a small vertical dipole to Chile and 100 watts, and I can start working Eastern Europe and Russia. And as the gray line moves west, I can work all the way to the West Coast US if I have 3 or 4 hours in the afternoon or evening. And it's really cool just to follow the gray line. It's really neat physics to do that. So be smart, and use the spotting clusters. Use the built-in things within 1mm or to look where the DX stations are and click on there, and just be patient. Keep calling. And listen, as Bob often says, listen, figure out what's working, and then give them a call, and eventually they will call you. So the last thing I just will say is be persistent. As Churchill once said, never, ever, ever, ever give up. That's true with DXing. You will get through eventually. Just keep trying, and don't pressure yourself, but just, enjoy it and celebrate working those countries. I often celebrate in my ham shack when I work a new DX entity or get a new multiplier contester, just to stay motivated. So anyway, that's what I have, Bill.
Okay. I will have to give credit to both Joe and Jay, K4ZLE, because in the late 80s, when I was starting to get ramped up on this stuff, I joined the Southwest Ohio DX group, and I don't know where they had individually come back from a couple places. And I said, look, I got an amplifier. I don't have an amplifier. I've got a vertical. And Jay was like, you can't believe how many small stations we work. What's your question? It's like, I can't seem to get through. And both he and Joe basically said, here's where everybody's calling. Here's where I'm listening. That's where you got to be. And it taught me a lot about you really have to listen. And when they say up 5, they kind of mean up 5, up 6, up 7, up 8. But what they don't mean is to call right on frequency. So a lot of times with the information, they're actually giving it to you. And then you have to listen to other people that are working them to find out where they're. So Joe, I appreciate that advice 40 years ago. My goodness, 40 years ago. But anything you want to add about computers or internet in the shack would be great.
Well, first of all, I'll send you a bill since you appreciated the information. Well, no, coming up years ago, I never had a computer. My paper logged, and then as things progress, and I guess I progressed, and I had a good Elmer, had a couple good Elmers, and I agree with Scott. Oh my God, the antenna is the most important part of the whole setup. You need a good antenna, and it needs to be resident wherever your whatever band you're working on. I am just a full believer of that. I don't even own a tuner, so all my antennas are all resident. I'm just a big guy that way. But the packet cluster, Scott mentioned it, and mine's over here running. I never shut it off. It runs 24/7. And if I get up in the middle of the night for my cookies and milk, I come in here and see if there's anything that I need to get on and work. So this has all been excellent comments, Bill. I don't really have any more to add, but I'm just tickled to death to be part of all this.
So your story about Janet running out to adjust the antenna at 2 in the morning isn't true? Everything's resonant. So
No,
Ned,
that is not true.
okay, so I'll let Ned wrap us up on this topic of, and then what I might ask you to do is dovetail. I did forget one other thing. How important is it to join a club? So talk about the internet and then maybe talk about the support from clubs.
Okay, well, this is a very, very interesting topic. I started engineering in '73, and there were computers, but they were big and heavy and had big line printers, and you had card decks, and it was not anything to do with ham radio. But the personal computers came out. All of a sudden you started to see them popping up in ham shacks, and they were involved in packet communications and some modest control of some equipment. But the evolution of that has just been amazing, even to me. I now have I count the number of displays I have that are, and how many PCs I use to run them, and I have remote PCs, and it's just I have turned into a network engineer over the last couple of years. I wasn't very good at that when I was a practicing engineer, and I built some pretty big communication systems, but I relied on network people to design, that all I wanted to know, do I have a connection, and blah, 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 everything moved on. But now I'm finding very, very, very interesting uses of networked systems to enhance DXing. I have a talk I give right now. It's about using remote stations for DXing. And I'll use an example right now on 6 meters. I am as passionate about 6 meters as Joe is about 60. It's just, it's where I cut my teeth. I know that band inside and out. I know what's unusual. And now I'm doing stuff that I never heard about. I use diversity DXing now, where I have multiple stations working a rare opening, like from here to Europe, is very unusual on 6 meters. It happens either in the peak of cycles on F2 propagation, which is what we all want when we're DXing. That's just the best way to get good signals from far away is relying on the very high layers of the ionosphere to be ionized to support that. We also get it with a lower sporadic E, which is a lower layer of propagation reflection. But when you get multiple hops, you can sort of work those same long distances in the summer, and that happens every year, and not just during the peak of these 11-year cycles. So there's more and more activity now on 6 meters chasing DX in a multi-hop E, and my use of networked stations to work that same opening from 2 different locations at the same time is something you can do now that you never used to be able to do. So it's changing the hobby. It is creating, I think, an attraction to ham radio operators to learn more than just about radios and antennas. Understanding how networks work and how to exploit them to do what is your hobby is, I think, both a good thing for your hobby and also good training for you to understand how how the world is working and needs to be designed to work for what we need to do next. I think ham radio can be more attractive to younger hams if it matches what it is they do, and they are into social networking, and ham radio has a place in that. If one of the hops in your connection between you and somebody else is via ham radio, it can be it can be another way to get interest in the hobby with the people who don't have beards right now. I find that whole aspect of amateur radio is exploding and very interesting and very germane to modern society, and I think that's where we're going to be going forward. As I mentioned earlier about having deed restrictions, not being able to put big antennas. Well, if the antenna doesn't have to be at your property, then and you can still play radio if you work on networking to places where radios are. And again, we have a team here in Phoenix. The Safford contest group, that was myself and 4 others, and we have a remote station out in Eastern Arizona, and we invite others to operate it. And many of the operators are not allowed to have outdoor antennas. So ham radio may not look the same going forward. And DXing is an attraction that will, I think, encourage more people to participate in the hobby if they can just somehow gain access to stations that they can't quite stand up in their own property. So I'm finding still lots to learn. I keep saying it. I retired 5 years ago, but I'm busier than I've ever been in my life right now, building stuff that I want to do for my interest, which primarily is ham radio.
It's funny what you brought up, because Scott had encouraged me years ago when he was the editor of the National Contest Journal. Was there a couple of PC articles I could put together? And my first thought was, what in the world would the National Contest Journal want with PC? And then when you go and you think about things like, well, what about backing up your files? What about, I'm going to pick a new PC. What do I have in it to make sure I can best leverage my ham radio software and my station? So you're right. It's really become integrated, and the more we can leverage that, the better we can be. So my closing thought would be, I'm a member of both the Southwest Ohio and the Twin Cities group. And what I'm starting to see now, for instance, this week, we've got 2 memberships requests for SWDEXA that are from not in this area, but because we're doing everything virtually now, and we're trying to provide programs, we're trying to push it out, as you said, through social media, people take notice. So my challenge for anyone listening would be, you can contact me or contact anybody on this podcast, and we'll put you in touch with a club who can help you out. I've never heard a club member ever say, no, I don't want to help you. I've never heard that. I don't know that other hobbies can say that, but in at least my experience, that's never happened. So let me start with Scott. Do you have any closing thoughts, Scott, or anything I missed that you think we should touch on for that new person who's tuning in to find out about DX and what their next step might be?
Well, first of all, want to congratulate SWDEXA, and thanks for reminding me I've got to renew my membership, because I really love your club. You sponsored the DXpedition of the Year Award, which is an important award, and you are a leader of leaders in the DX club. Ned's part of the Arizona Outlaws and Arizona DX Club. It's a CADXA, Central Arizona DX Association. It's another great club. There are a number of great clubs. I guess my last comments are this, Bill. DXing is fun. It's what got me into ham radio, to be able to talk to people around the world. And even if it's a short conversation, it is scary. Just give it a try. You'll really like it. If you have any desire to do it, just give it a try. It's not hard. It doesn't require an enormous station. Just give it a try, and I think you'll like it. And if you don't like it, then you can blame me. But I think you will like it. And your spouse can't blame me if you start investing in ham radio.
That's right.
I jokingly say I started working as a teenager to improve my ham radio station. I think I still do.
And is it all right if someone wants to contact you directly, they can reference your QRZ.com page?
Yes, I would encourage that. Please do. And I would say also, we'll try to help you find good internet resources. There's some things on YouTube that are not very good about DXing and the contesting, and there are some that are good. And we'll help direct you to reputable sources that will not waste your money or be trying to sell you on some antenna that's really expensive, that's a knockoff vertical or something. But most of us did DXing on home built antennas, and you can still do it. You don't have to buy really expensive antennas. And so, yeah, please contact me. And I belong to a couple of clubs in the Midwest, the Twin City DX Association and the Minnesota Wireless Association, and they really are helpful. It's one of the real joys of living here in the Midwest is to have access to such a good group of hams to help me out.
I agree. I wanted to bring a picture of my first ham shack because I had a 100-watt light bulb that was my dummy load, and I would literally just, depending on what it was, I had an old ICO 720, and I would tune that to get peak on the light. And people think I'm crazy. It's like, no, it works. It works really well. So don't discount it too quickly. Joe, any closing thoughts?
Well, I love amateur radio, and one reason, of course, I'm a DXer. I love that, but there's so many facets to ham radio. We've been talking about DXing today, but there's a lot of guys and girls that like repeater systems, And there's all kind of other facets of ham radio besides what we're talking about today. But like we have discussed, buy an affordable radio, put up a decent antenna, and get on the air and enjoy it. And I guess above all things, try to find a good club member, a good club member, and any of those guys and girls are more than willing to help you and walk you through any problem that you might have.
Okay, Ned, you want to take us home?
Yeah, well, let me put on my ARRL hat. The ARRL has a resource, which is a club locator. You can search their page. They have a search engine that will work and help you point to that, and you can type in your location and it will list ham clubs in your area. Not all ham clubs are DX clubs, but I know in Phoenix, in Arizona, we have three actually, Southern, Central, and Northern Arizona DX, but we've got 50, 60 clubs in the state. And so find a club, attend meetings, whether it's virtual or real, and talk to people. I guarantee you, they will be so happy that someone new walked in the door. You won't believe it.
Well, you're right.
Clubs are in my opinion, are the backbone of ham radio. It's what keeps it going. Those two clubs that Scott had mentioned, the Central Arizona and Arizona Outlaws Contest Club, are vital to me. Most of my best friends are members of those organizations, and that's how we keep connected, and that's how we meet new people who join the area. They join the club and develop good relationships. Clubs are the absolute most important part of promoting ham radio, and seek one out, and you'll be amazed at how happy they will be to meet you.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out of your days. I know everyone's busy, and I'm personally honored and just excited as you agreed to take some time. And your wisdom is terrific. And if there's anything I can do for you all, like if I get a trip to Korea, I'll put you at the top of the list. That may be the only way I can help you, but at any point, and if you happen to make it to the of course, the Hamvention, the DX dinner, would love to get you a cold 807. I guess I'm dating myself with that phrase, right? A cold 807, but we'll fix you up and get an eyeball, and it would be great. So thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill, for putting it on.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, Joe. It's a pleasure, Bill.
I hope you enjoyed the video version of the DX Mentor. If you did, I'd love to have you subscribe or even click on the thumbs up to let me know we're doing a good job and delivering the content you wanted. Special thanks to our DX gurus this week, Ned, AA7A, Scott, K0MD, and Joe, W8GEX, and also to my XYL for her love and support. Thanks, Karen. 7-3.